Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today our group will be presenting our group assignment for ECO 3043 Macroeconomics. Our group title is Inflation. This is the summary of topic that we will be presenting today.
So, the first question is, what is inflation? Inflation is an increase in the overall price level. Or in other words, inflation is an economic term that refers to the general increase in price of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. It also represents a decrease in the purchasing power of a currency, or preferably known as a value of money, as each unit of a currency buys fewer goods and services compared to before. Next is the measure and formula of inflation rate. Inflation is typically measured as a percentage change in a price of a basket of goods and services over a period of time. The most common measure of inflation is the Consumer Price Index, or the short term known as CPI. CPI is a price index computed each month by the Bureau of Labor Statistics using a bundle that is meant to represent a market basket purchased monthly by the typical urban consumer. The formula to calculate the inflation rate using the CPI is inflation rate equal to CPI in the current year minus CPI in the previous year over CPI in the previous year times 100. The resulting inflation rate represents the percentage change in the average price level from the previous year to the current year.
So now we go to the type of inflation. So there are three types of inflation: demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. The first type of inflation is demand pull inflation. It occurs when the demand for goods or service is higher when compared to the production capacity. The difference between demand and supply result in price appreciation. For the second one is cost push inflation. So it occurs when the cost of production increases. Increase in price of the inputs increase the price of the product. Cost push inflation often kicks in when demand pull inflation is going strong. So the last one is built-in inflation. So expectation of future inflations result in built-in inflation. A rise in price result in higher wages to afford the increased cost of living. High wages result in increased cost of production, which in turn has an impact on product pricing. Next, we go to the cost of inflation. So the cost of inflation is supply shocks, money supply, and expectation and spirals. For the supply shock, inflation often happens because of supply shocks, major disruption to an important economic input such as energy. Supply shock might set off a sustained increase in price because there aren't many good alternatives, and so the price keeps getting bid up. So for the money supply, an increase in the money supply will tend to cause inflation. Inflation rises when too much money is chasing too few goods. So for the last one is expectation and spirals. In many models of inflation, the cost isn't an increase in the money supply, but an unanticipated increase in the money supply. How much inflation people expect affects how much inflation we actually get.
There are several ways to control inflation. The first one is by monetary policy. One approach is by adjusting the interest rate. When central banks raise interest rate, it becomes more expensive to borrow money, which reduces borrowing and spending, thereby curbing inflationary pressures. The second way is by fiscal policy. By adjusting taxation and government spending, they can influence aggregate demand in the economy. The third one is by exchange rate policy. Countries may manage their exchange rate as a means of controlling inflation. Allowing the currency to appreciate increase in value can reduce the cost of imports as it takes fewer units of the local currency to purchase foreign goods. The fourth way of controlling inflation is by supply-side policies. These policies focus on enhancing the economy's capacity to produce goods and services more efficiently. The fifth way is by wage and price controls. These controls aim to stabilize prices and prevent runaway inflation.
There are some positive effects of inflation. First, stimulating economic growth. 2. Increased consumer spending. 3. Higher wages. 4. Asset value appreciation. 5. Easier loan repayment. 6. enhance export competitiveness. 7. Higher investment returns. 8. Protection against deflation.
So, for example, negative of inflation is inflation growth tend to be unsustainable. Inflation tend to be discouraged. And then the third one, investment and long-term economic growth. And then inflation can make an economy uncompetitive. Next, reduce the value of savings, many costs, and also the last one is fall in real wage. So for example for inflation is, as a close approach, let's take Malaysia as an example. In Malaysia, the most important categories in the consumer price index of food and non-alcoholic beverage, which is 30% of total weight, and housing, water, electricity, gas and other fuels, which is 24% of total weight. And then the index also include transport 50%, miscellaneous goods and service, which is 7%, and communication 5%, furnishing household equipment and also routine household maintenance, which is 4%, clothing and footwear 3%, restaurant and hotels, which is also 3%, and then alcoholic beverage and tobacco 2%, health also 2%, and then the last one is education, only 1%.
In conclusion, inflation is a rise in the general level of prices of goods and services in an economy over a period of time. Inflation is the result of excess of aggregate demand over the aggregate supply, and the true inflation starts after full employment. Inflation plays a vital role for the development of economy. The inflation rate must be at a moderate level. For developing countries, 3% to 4% raise of inflation could be acceptable, but in developed countries, it must be only 1% to 2%. So the inflation rate must be controlled properly by the central bank of the particular country. Here is the summary of policy recommendation for inflation as mentioned before. The first one is monetary policy, second one is fiscal policy, exchange rate policy, supply side policies, and lastly, wage and price controls. Here is the list of references that we use for this assignment. That's all for our group assignment presentation. Thank you.